Welcome back, welcome in, welcome for the first time perhaps to the Unwritten Earth Symposium podcast. I am here, as per usual, with my good friend Epadiah Ravishal to talk about games, game design, playing games, the best practices in doing both of these things, perhaps, and related matters. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Epadiah, and I'm here with my good friend Nathan DiPaoletta, and also my old good friend, a special guest to the show today, Nat Barmore. We go way back, way back. I mean, Nathan, you and I go way back, but Nat and I go
discussed previously, wayer back,
probably like a decade more back. Let's see here.
Oh, are we giving away years and ages?
I mean, I mean, if you don't want to, that's fine. But
no, fine. 92.
92. Yes. Oh, wow. I forgot that it goes back to even that far. Wow. Yeah. Nat, would you like to introduce yourself?
So, Nat Barmore, it's not inconceivable. You've also seen me around in the RPG world as Wood Elf. Sometimes the names are very much associated and sometimes they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Long-time role-playing game designer, and always been very interested in design of games, both as a actual task but also as a theory thing. I kind of came from it from the scientific idea of pure science. I feel like there can be pure game theory where we'll figure the theory out first, and then maybe there will be a way to use it in a game, and maybe there won't. Anyway, so that goes way back. And yeah, I met Epi. We met in college. Freshman year.
My first failed attempt at college, which I succeeded at later, but that was the beginning.
It's all relative. I mean, it took me a while to get through college too. For slightly different reasons, but anyway. So and so I've been doing these sorts of things. I co-created Dread with Epi,
which I'm pointing to right now, which is good radio.
And since then, been on again, off again. Life kind of changes things up. So I'm quite as involved as maybe I'd like to be in sort of the community and discussions and whatnot relating to the RPG world. So this is really nice to be here and have a chance to talk about some of these things, new and old.
Yeah.
You're our first visiting scholar into the symposium, our little fictional framework for what we're doing here. We try to connect things together a little bit so we have our listening scholars, you're our visiting scholar, me and Epi are the provosts of our respective domains, and we're all here in the spirit of game design inquiry, which I think you are well suited to help us expand some of what we know about games, the things that lurk within your shelves. Strange and exciting.
Yeah, I guess you can kind of see
we can. I assume it just goes on forever off the edge of the frame.
No, not quite, but it is both sides to me. So you're seeing, I don't know, let's call it maybe a quarter. Ignore the boxes. We moved recently.
A quarter mile, roughly.
Roughly, yeah.
Nat and I have like we've mentioned, long history of playing role-playing games together, but also just talking about game design. And we both have extensive collections of games, which makes Nat the perfect visiting scholar for homework. We want to learn what's in the depths of this library here.
Yes, indeed. We have a homework assignment that we have not had on the show because I think, as we mentioned previously, we've had a pretty big gap between our recordings and we weren't quite sure what our next thing was going to be. Traditionally, we drop in the cut of what our homework was to refresh everyone. But here we'll just say what we decided in the interim, which was just for each of us to go to our library and select a title that we think has a good likelihood that the other two probably are not familiar with. So obscure to a degree, but also something that you think will be interesting to teach the other two people about if they do not know it. If our guessing game ends up going awry and we do know the thing, that's fine. We can talk about why you thought maybe other people wouldn't know about it.
Can't get A's on all the homework. Sometimes you got to settle for a B.
I am dedicated to the pass-fail lifestyle.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah. So what do you think? Should one of us go first?
Sure. Yeah. We'll step up to the bat and
We'll mix a couple more sports metaphors.
Yeah. Let's get as many. Yeah.
So, Epi,
Yeah.
what obscure title do you have to try and surprise us with? How about that?
Yeah. So I did some hunting. I ran into a problem. I found 2 games that I thought for sure I was going to be able to stump both of you on. And then I read them, and I could not within them find an Arcane Gem. They're both from the early 90s. So I probably would have had them when I first met Nat, but like I wasn't excited about them at the time or whatever. Anyways, I'm not going to mention their names because there's no need to put anybody on blast or anything like that. Someone else might find Arcane Gems in these games, and that's fine. Then I picked another one that I knew of an Arcane Gem in it, but then I couldn't find and verify the Arcane Gem that I thought was in it, which I did eventually do like moments before we did the show, before we started recording. But in the meantime, all of those games go from the late 80s to early 90s, and I thought, okay, I'm abandoning that route, cutting myself off. I'm only going to go back as far as 2012. So this is a risky one, because I think there is a chance that either one or both of you know about this game. But you may just know about them and haven't actually explored it. So the game here is called Mitchtim.
Okay.
Came out in 2012 from Grim Ogre Press. Written by George Meir, who was a Twitter mutual back when there was a Twitter. Mm-hmm. I think in the diaspora, I might have lost track of him, which is unfortunate.
Nat is holding up his hardcover copy.
No, okay. But have you opened it yet?
I have opened it. Give me a little credit.
Okay, all right. Well, I knew it was a gamble. So this game, you are not hamsters. You are playing these little furry folk who are, Mitchtim, the titular Mitchtim, who are rodents. I'm sorry. Throughout the book, they make it very clear that they are not rodents. They just appear like rodents. Like, that's the thing. They're anthropomorphic. They live next to human society, and part of your adventuring is dealing with modern day human society. But basically, oh my god, the art in here. These Mitchtims are just adorable little. Look at the goggles on that guy.
Oh, yeah. I was gonna say I know this game only from also I think being Twitter mutuals with George and also seeing the art that he would reshare about it and being like, oh, those are great. But I did not pull the trigger on actually like checking out the game. I don't. So we're in the good. You get to explain it to me.
Please do, because while I did read it, that was whenever I acquired it a while back, and I haven't.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's like, sure, I've read it, but that was. But do I remember it?
All right. And in fairness, I think there's a reasonable chance, finding out now that you are friends with even if just online, it's quite possible that you're the reason I have it. So,
That is originally why I was in the 80s looking at games. Anyways,
you're a game super spreader. That's your problem.
Yeah,
you get excited about a game, and then everyone's like, "Oh, I should get this game too."
So, I'll go straight to the Arcane Gem. I'll describe the rules around it and what I think is kind of neat about it. In this game, you have callings, which are sort of like classes, careers, archetypes, whatever you want to like. We're going to call them callings. That's fine. You have a Mitchum who has a calling, and you also have these 5 emotions, which are, and I don't know them off the top of my head, joy, love, grief, fear, and anger. And these are the stats that are going to determine your success at things, right? So if you're going to attack someone, you're going to do it out of anger. If you're going to try and cure someone, you're going to do it out of love. If you're trying to run about, that's joy. If you're trying to flee or evade or hide, that's fear, that kind of thing. Much like things that are powered by the apocalypse, they have specific moves tied to each one of these. So you're not spending time trying to figure out, like, how do I make my grief work here? You have a action that's going to trigger it. You're going to have a number of dice in those. When you make a character, you start with 1 die in each of them, plus 7 more dice that you divvy up however you want, with a maximum of, I'm going to say 4. Look, don't quote me on it, but something like that. So you can end up with like 1 to 4 dice in these, with most of them being around 2 or 3. You're going to roll those dice, add them together. So in the case of joy, where you want to like sprint around or jump. Let's say you have 2 dice, you roll the 2 dice, you add them together, and you're trying to get 7 or more.
Are they all the same kind of die?
They're all D6s. Yes, thank you for asking the very obvious and important question. Oh, sorry, greater than 7. So you can't. 7 isn't good. You want to get better than 7. Although, actually, now that I think about it, one of the examples here, they have them succeed on a 7, but that's fine. That could just be something that went back and forth between editions or whatever. The point is, there's a number. Let's say it's 7.
The target number. You're trying to get it on two or 3 or 4 dice, basically.
Yeah, or 1. First of all, part of the Arcane Gem is tying it to emotions rather than strength and dexterity and things like that. I think that's kind of fun and neat. But then the part that makes that really shine, I think, is mood. And what happens is when you roll for something, if you get a 6, but a 6 on one or more of your dice, I should say, not like 6s in the total. You get a mood token in that emotion. And that just sits around and means a +1 to that emotion for future rolls. So the more 6s you roll, the more, like, for instance, in the case of like using your joy to jump over a chasm, like from rooftop to rooftop, and you roll and you get a 6 and a 3, you succeed, and also you get 1 mood die that makes it easier to do these jumping things later on because you're more joyful. You're growing in joy. That part, I think, is really neat.
Does the token, is that persistent? Or is it something that you, like, spend, like, on a roll?
It's persistent, but you can spend it to get another die. And I'll explain.
Right. There are some circumstances where you then use the tokens for other things. Yeah.
And you're also limited in the number of tokens you can have. Like, the power that the Adventurer Calling has is that they can have up to 7 of these mood tokens in each one of their emotions.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
So that's nice, but I think like the limit is 3, and I think even the adventurer only gets up to a +3 bonus. The ones that go beyond that are just used for spending or whatever. But the other thing is that these emotions are not entirely compatible. There's 5 of them. They make up a pentacle, a pentagram. And if you think of the pentagram, the 5-pointed star, and the 2 emotions that are on the opposite side, those count against your roll if you have mood tokens in that.
Oh, okay.
So, for instance, in joy, the 2 opposite ones, I believe, are grief and fear. So if you have grief and fear, those mood tokens in grief and fear, that counts against your joy.
And you add them up, you take the higher?
You add them up, I think.
Okay.
So it's like
either one, yeah.
Yeah. But like I said, you're only going to have a few of these mood tokens lying around because you might be spending them. There is specifically a rule that you have to spend them on an action. You can't spend them to just get rid of them.
Right.
Oh,
you can't be like, oh no, I
don't want to be griefy.
I don't want to be griefy anymore. I'm just going to spend it. It has to be like for something in particular.
Yeah. And then the part that I really think is very juicy to me, the part that I really like is that rolling that 7 or more or greater than 7 is a success. 1 hit, 1 success. To get more than 1 success, you have to roll less dice than you're capable of. So let's say you have like 4 dice in joy, and you're like, I'm going to put 1 die aside and roll 3 of them. If I get more than 7 on those 3 dice, I get 1 hit for making the success and 1 hit for the die I set aside. So it's like a push your luck mechanic, or not push your luck, because that's usually like after you make the roll. But it's like you think you're going to be able to pull it off with less dice. So you're going to shoot for something more spectacular. You want to do something, you want to get more hits by setting aside dice. So the mood tokens become kind of important there because, like, if you end up with 3 mood tokens in joy, you could even set aside all your dice but 1 and still have an okay chance at succeeding, depending on where we fall on the 7 or greater than 7 thing. Yeah, but like, and like there's other, each of the callings have like separate powers and things that do things. And again, you can spend those mood tokens to gain dice, presumably to then set those dice aside and get a bigger hit, or just to make it more possible to get that big hit. And I like that. I like that idea of like, I've got a bunch of dice in this, which makes it very consistent that I succeed. I can get into a flow with it because the more dice I'm rolling, the more likely at least one of them is a 6, which means more mood tokens, which makes it even more likely to succeed. And then when I'm really likely to succeed, I can toss a bunch of these dice away and succeed in a very dramatic fashion, or like an over the top kind of have a much bigger impact on how things are going to go. So, anyways, that is not the entirety of it, but that is like the arcane gem that I found in it. There's some other neat little things in here. Like the society is fun. The glossary of terms is like both explains like terms for the game, but also like words that the Mitchum use. And there's like a nice pronunciation of them. You know, like a bunday. A bunday is a band of Mitchtums going out on adventures. So that's fun.
Nice.
A botch-ichne is a range of tasty bakery products that are highly priced in Mitchtum culture. They're both sweet and savory. So that's great. It's fun. Cute little book. Nice hardcover. And yeah, so that's Mitchtum Fluffy Adventures. And I'm actually glad that the both of you knew about it, but I'm also glad that I was able to
but not enough about
bring
it.
Something forward.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like having a success spiral, runaway success kind of mechanic thing does happen. Like I think that's a fairly common, like not necessarily like first game, but it's like a pattern that you can fall into of like trying to reward success and make it so that people can build on early successes to get better. And then all of a sudden you get into a point where people can't fail, and what's even the point? Like over a certain threshold, it's like, what are we even doing here? But then this is bringing in a reason to mindfully be like, oh, I don't need to use all of these resources. Yeah. Because I have a reason to take a risk, right? It's basically like, I'm going to take a risk here is essentially the choice you're making.
And there's some fun, like for instance, I keep coming to the example we use, but like joy, like I said, is opposed by fear and grief.
Sounds right.
And fears you're evading, like you're avoiding being hit. So it means that like the more joyful you are, the more times you spend running around, hopping around on things, and the more mood you build in joy, the less likely you are to evade your opponent, right? Like you're just out in the open, and so like even building on those successes, you end up like shutting down the other things you might want to do or might need to do next.
I think the other thought I had while you were describing it was this idea of like that shifting, like even like on your sheet, being able to kind of track being able to see where your character is kind of at, where they're like kind of where their head's at by like, oh, I have a bunch of joy and a bunch of grief, and no anger, right? Like that's an interesting, like, what does that mean, or what am I doing with that? My selection is the opposite of that. So
should we do it in opposition then?
Yeah.
Ugly creatures with no emotions that kind of opposite.
Well, my friends.
Are you about to tell me that you don't think we know about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Is that what you're trying to...
No. I too kind of went down my shelf. My process was like, what's something that like I'm like, oh, here's a game that I feel like never really got a moment in the sun. But is also not necessarily something that I think is in your orbit. So we'll find out. This game is called Urchin by Clint Krause. This is a Dreamation era gem. Clint was coming to Dreamation and DexCon for a while, so I think that's where I like kind of got to know him in some of his games. It's from 2007, and it is based on / inspired by a film of the same name, like an indie film by John Harlacher is the creator of that, who I think is a friend of Clint's.
Now here's my question for you.
Yes.
Did we not sell that at Design Matters at one point?
We might have because Clint was part of Design Matters, Clint and Amy, because we had their like boxed board game,
right? Fallen something Dust,
Empire of Dust. That is a RPG with board game components that is boxed up in a little box set, and I almost pulled that, and then I was like, I bet Epi will remember this. Oh yeah, you have the token.
I have the Empire of Dust tokens here for some reason in my pile of tokens. Oh, which I now have to put very far away from me so that you
stop playing with them and making clicking noises. Anyway, Urchin is an earlier work where you play outcasts and the unhoused and the scum of society in Scum City, which is the city below the streets of New York, right? And I'll just read the pitch here. Far below the streets of New York City, the outcasts struggle for survival. This is Scum City. Nothing here is certain, but there are those who say that paradise is not far away. Will you be the one to lead us all to Agharta? It's a role-playing game of survival against the odds based on the independent film. So, yeah, this is kind of the opposite of furry adventures with your adorable creatures and your emotions and...
But in the same realm as like adjacent to common human society, right? Like adjacent to what we like see as human society. Then
and there's a lot of stuff. So this is like a high flavor, low mechanic kind of game, right? The rules for making your characters is to get a piece of trash to write on as your character sheet, for example.
Great.
A crumpled up paper bag that used to have a liquor bottle in it is ideal, or a grease stained piece of like a burger wrapper.
Yeah, my first thought was a burger wrapper. That would
exactly. The core of how it works is that your character has two things. I think Scummers. I think everyone's called Scummers. Yeah, you're Scummers. So you're all playing Scummers, and then the GM is the king. And Scummer, your character is defined by your meat and your mind, and those are a number. You generate your character by rolling it's all six-siders, rolling 2 dice and taking the higher number. So random character generation.
Yeah.
And then there's also some rules, like you have some freeform traits, and you can get gear as you play. I think the overall pattern of play is kind of what I'm interested in, which is like you can either, if you have a scene you want, you can do what's called grab a scene, where you're like, you go around and everyone kind of takes it in turn, and on your turn you can grab a scene where you're like, I want to do this, like I want to go busk, or I want to go cook up some there's a specific cook up some blessing, which is a magical drug that is part of this world, or you can I don't know what I want to do, and then the king throws something at you, and there's a little table you can also just roll on for like, here's a scene you could have.
Is the king a character in the story, or is it like
is
that more the GM role? It's
the GM role, but also there's a light mythic, and I think a lot of this probably comes from the film, right? I don't know. I have not seen this movie, but there's this semi-mythical quality where everyone who lives in Scum City knows about or is actively seeking Agharta, which is kind of like a transcendent state. And I think the king is nominally a character who is in Agharta, or who looks back at you from this kind of blessed state.
Has achieved it.
Yeah. You can become what's called a captain, which is kind of like close to getting there. And other than that, there's no like social order, really. It's just like, get what you can, survive, etc. But the tension is all about rot. When you are in a conflict, you're going to be rolling either your meat or your mind, and that is your pool of d6s, and you're rolling those dice, and you're looking for sixes. Sixes are success. Everything that's not a 6, or rather everything from 2 to 5, is just nothing, doesn't help you. And if you roll a 1, that indicates rot, and you lose a die out of that pool. So your meat rots and your mind rots over time.
This is the opposite of mixed. Right. Yeah, I like this. I think this.
So as you can see, it's a high variability situation, right? There's no die pools. You're just looking for 1s and 6s in pools of between generally 2 to 6 dice. How you gain back into those pools is basically by going out and doing things. The Arcane Gem here is kind of this blending of the character trait, like often your traits and your like resources are kind of divided up, right? Like you have points in your trait and you're rolling dice or whatever, and that's kind of like static, except on like the long, like if you're getting experience or something, right? And then you might have like the token like the Urchin tokens. You might have a resource that you build up and that you spend from, etc. Urchin kind of combines these into one thing. So how you get more meat is you go eat things. So when you get food, you gain points in meat.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
And when you smoke blessing, you get points back in mind. The struggle to get those things might cost you. You could rot because every roll is a risk. But if you have a roll, if you're like, I don't know, break into a Subway at night to like steal all the hoagie rolls or whatever.
Oh, right. Subway restaurant, not Subway.
Sorry, Subway restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's two. Yeah, you could be
Anyway.
breaking into the Subway all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, you might find some rolls in the other Subway
That
somewhere
too.
too. I mean,
Yeah.
It's very possible.
Yeah, and you succeed in that like conflict or whatever, and the king's like, yeah, there's 3 points of food there, then your meat goes up by 3.
Nice.
Easy.
Yeah.
But if you blow that roll and roll 2 1s, you rot, but then, maybe it makes up for what you got, or maybe it doesn't. And then the other kind of consistent pressure on the group, you're not necessarily like working together, or whatever. You can be in each other's scenes. You don't have to be. But at the end of every round, there's this device deep in Scum City that keeps the lights on, and it needs to be fed. If it is not fed, the lights go off, and what happens in the dark is very bad. There is a table of things that the king rolls for what happens when it goes dark, and it's stuff like everyone succumbing to shadow madness. This is actually my favorite one. In the dark, everyone kind of goes crazy, and then when it comes light again, you shuffle up everyone's character sheet, and now you have the character sheet of someone else from the table.
That's fun
to play going forward.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Invasion from below. Meatheads are like people who live in the up above, like in the real world or whatever. So a meathead invasion is like the cops come down on to cleanse out the tunnels or like something like that. Anyway, bad stuff. The other economy in here is you can get cash. So someone has to pay to keep the lights on every round, and that's a free-form negotiation. All right, who's going to keep the lights on? And it's like who has cash and who's willing to spend. It's not a lot. It's just one like cash. But sometimes that might be a lot, or sometimes you might all be out. So there's a little bit of like, as you're getting towards the end of a round, maybe being like, hey, can we pay to keep the lights on? Like there's that kind of pressure. And yeah, it's kind of meant to be like a one shot, revel in this weird world, see what your scummers get up to, can you survive kind of thing.
I was like, well, maybe this movie's somewhere I could watch. And the trade dressing for the movie is exactly so they had the rights to the movie. Is that?
Yeah, the director wrote the forward, and the art's all stylized screenshots from the movie.
For those listening, roughly around the time we record it, this is the 2007 movie, not the 2025 movie named Arcane, which I don't know if that's any relation, but probably not. That, as Nat and I know, is the danger of a single word title.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so there's some things about it creates a very like staccato kind of play, right? Where some scenes are super short, some are going to be longer, some are going to be meaningful, and some are just going to be pure like, I'm almost out of meat, I gotta find something to eat. There's some cannibalism rules, so it's from 2007. There's some kind of like edgy, kind of ways that things are described and whatever.
It's interesting because we keep kind of coming back to some of those ideas. It makes sense, 2007. I'm just thinking culturally of like, I don't know the better phrasing. I want to say like a fascination with the sort of homeless underworld kind of thing. Like, I want to be charitable. It doesn't sound like this is like exoticizing it or just making them a spectacle, but it's also fantasizing it a little bit and at a minimum, and it's kind of exaggerating it, and it's not quite glorifying it either. But, like, okay, I was curious. So Kingdom of Nothing is from a few years after that.
Yeah. That's kind of the game this is probably in conversation with.
But I'm also like thinking of like, when did like the Nevers, or wait, there's Neverwhere and there's the Nevers. I always mix those up. But those also are from,
Yeah, Neverwhere, probably a little earlier, I think.
I think the book is earlier and the TV's later.
Mm-hmm.
Because wasn't Neverwhere a comic book series first? Oh, a novel, apparently.
Going back into the 80s, you got the Beauty and the Beast TV
has
series
a lot of that.
with
Yeah.
Ron Perlman and what's her name? Sarah Connor from Terminator.
Linda Hamilton.
Thank you. Dickens did a lot of this, so it goes back. It's a long tradition.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying it's very much a not maybe perpetual, but a cyclic kind of depending.
Yeah.
I'm thinking in terms of the zeitgeist, and
For
you
sure.
know, like doesn't that time frame kind of also overlap with they're very different games in other. They're much more fantastical. You've got Lacuna, and then a few years after that, Don't Rest Your Head.
Yeah, those are direct references. The like little ludography that Clint has in here calls out.
Okay. So they actually at least one of those.
Lacuna, Don't Rest Your Head, and then earlier, right, Underworld and HOL, Human Occupied Landfill.
Oh, right, yes.
It's like earlier, and then
You said that game was 2007?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I don't know. Don't Rest Your Head was that long ago.
I know. Don't Rest Your Head is like also way earlier than I remember.
Again, I have to bring up the rubric that somebody else gave me, which is at this age, however long ago you think it was, it's twice as long. Like that is just what it is.
Yeah, there's been a little bit of that.
Yeah. If one wanted to zoom out a little bit and be like, there's this interest in underworlds, going into the subconscious, retreating from our day-to-day life experience right before the financial crisis, right?
Yeah.
That was exactly what I was kind of thinking about. I'm like, how much of that, how much of that was part of the same thing that led to the financial crisis and Occupy Wall Street, and how much of that movie and game would be completely different if it had been written 2 years later.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating, just the setting part of it and like the themes it's going for and that sort of thing. In addition to the rulesy parts of it and such.
The metaphor of rot is really strong. On the design level, I'm reading through it. I'm like, so what tools do you have to kind of smooth this stuff out so that you're not just, I'm like, no, you're just at the mercy of the dice. That's it. That's the play. And I was like, okay, I can get on board with that. But it's very raw in that way where, my inclination would be to be like, let's give the players reasons to do certain things that's going to help protect themselves or something like that, or avoid these consequences for some thematic purpose or something. And I'm like, oh no, that is the theme. The theme is you're at the mercy of fate. So yeah. That's my pick. I think I played it one. I think I played at Dreamation probably with Clint. It's maybe why it sticks in my memory a little.
The Arcane Gem. I know you mentioned it, but I just wanted to refresh myself here. The Arcane Gem that you were kind of pointing at in there was
your character. Like the thing that you're rolling on is also the thing that you are going to be like gaining points in. Or losing points from. Like it's all one number.
The better you do at it, the higher the score gets and the better you'll do, but it's not a guarantee, right? I mean, if I understood right.
It's the ones.
The more dice you get, the more chance you have to both succeed and rot because you're rolling your whole pool.
Right. Okay.
Every time.
So not an automatic spiral in either direction, but
yeah, it spirals on either end, and it's more likely to spiral down
because of the math.
Yeah, if you're only rolling 2 or 3 dice, rolling a 1 has a way bigger impact on your pool, on your next pool. Right. While if you're rolling 7 dice, rolling a 1 and you rot by 1, you still have 6 for your next roll. So so there's some rules for when you hit rock bottom. One of them is you can die. Like you're like, okay, I'm dead now. The other one for mind is if you rot all the way down to 0 in your mind pool, you can have I forget what it's called, but sudden inspiration. Like you have to hit rock bottom to get back up kind of thing.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You can gain mind by hitting 0 mind.
Cool. Yeah.
But if you hit zero meat, your choices are wait for someone to help you and like give you something to eat and then you get meat points back, or choose that character's dead now and make a new character.
It's interesting. It feels like, I think we talked about her kind of hinted at this in a recent episode, but like this feels like leaning into the problem that first edition Vampire had with its botches, right?
It's kind of like using the botches as the mechanic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because if I remember correctly, well, it's a D10 in first edition Vampire, and you're rolling, you want to roll as many as you want, but if you roll a 1, it's a botch.
Yeah, ones cancel out 10s. Or is that the new rule?
I can't remember.
I lose track of when they were cancel and when they were automatic. And yeah.
At one point,
I think it was just if you got a 1, it didn't matter how many successes you had. That was the botch. Yeah, that was
so
the bad
like
rule.
the better you got at it, the more likely you were to botch.
Yeah,
and like that was clearly not the intent for cool, competent vampires.
Yeah.
But for this, it's good.
Right.
It's chef kiss in case that didn't come through. Yeah, I dig it.
So there you go, Urchin.
All right, now
All right, so
you're on.
first of all, I was kind of a similar process to kind of what you were saying, Effie, is I'm thinking like, okay, what is good, has something interesting to talk about, and I haven't already talked about a bunch, you know,
Right,
so that's one piece of it. Like, if I've been talking about this for the last, and so that was a piece of it. But I also was trying to think of, like, so for example, to your point about earlier, is like, in the pile over here, there's one thing, and I'm not gonna name and shame here or anything like that, but it was,
Good. That is not in the spirit of this podcast.
right.
Yeah.
But the point, it was a self-published in the era, like before that was a realistic thing, you know, like this is one step up from took typewriter pages to the binder, to the local place that can do binding kind of thing. It's very much in the, hey, look, I made my own D&D. It's got some interesting bits, but mostly I have it for the novelty of like, I think it's wonderful that somebody made this. And like, there's a lot of stuff in here. And I was flipping through and there was a thing that was kind of the target number for like, if you're casting a spell on someone and they don't want you to. And it's different for every class versus every other class. Plus there's a modifier for your species.
Fun.
So you have a nice big table to find like
Exactly.
a semi-arbitrary number.
But it's also not like dramatically different. Like the numbers range from like 12 to 15, and I think you're rolling a d20 plus like you're something, you know? So it's like, it's different, but yeah, it's like, anyway, I'm like, yeah, these guys don't know this thing. I'm sure of it. But there wasn't enough that I could pull out. I'm like, yeah, this is really something that like the world needs. And the other thing is, let's say somebody's interested. I don't think you're finding it anywhere, you know, something like that. Like,
sure.
I mean, I will say that
no, that's not the only reason, but
you know, sometimes it's worth just bringing it up to like, because we're just talking about what you might be able to use in your own design or something like that. So yeah.
So what I actually ended up looking back to is, and then there were a couple things. Actually, one of them was right off the top of my head that I'm like, I'm betting you guys don't know about, and have some really interesting things. And I'm just trying to decide which one is like. There's like.
Our listeners may want to know that there is a stack of books next to Nat that he is currently considering, and we were like, okay, pick whatever you think is going to be best, like in the moment.
I think what I want to talk about here is the one that I think is the most kind of arcane gemmy of them. There are several really cool things in here. Amaranthine. It's not that old, so I don't know if you guys have heard of it or not.
I have heard of it. I don't know much about it, but I have.
I think I recognize the title, but I couldn't tell you what it's about.
I'm thinking it's probably 10 years already by now. Let's see. Oh, great. It opens with fiction. Well, it is released under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike 3.0. So that tells us a little bit of the date. But I want to say 2011, maybe?
RPG Geek says 2011.
Okay. Wow.
Oh, it's from Machine Age. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Olivia Hill and Philomena Young.
Yeah. Okay. So I recognize the publisher, but not the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing that's interesting about this. Like, I put something about this on my blog a few years back. This is one I've gotten to play extensively. We did a medium-length campaign playing it.
Cool.
And so really I got to get into it and really see what's there. Okay, how to sum this up? So the very basic shtick, and to kind of sum it up, is you are playing recurrently reincarnated group of characters.
Okay.
It's like you die, you come back, and this has been happening for millennia, maybe longer. And you're all kind of your destinies are intertwined. So you always find the same people every life, more or less. Like maybe not every person, maybe there's a dozen people and like in any given life, 9 or 10 of them you'll encounter or something like that, depending. And those will be the PCs, but could also be some NPCs. The overall game structure, it's a pretty traditional game in the sense of like there's a GM, there's PCs, there's, clearly defined, these are the NPCs. I can't remember if they actually use the term NPC. They do talk about guest characters at one point. And the way you're entangled, which is the thing that I think is the most gemmiest gem in here and one of the best things I've seen in a game is, and I will quote, with each of these characters, you have 4 relationships. Always, once, sometimes, never. So in each life, and so like their little whatever on the back, their ad blurb here, I have always loved you. Once I murdered you. We have sometimes died together. I have never let you escape. These are very melodramatic relationships.
Yeah, no, it's good.
And maybe not healthy, but they're bigger, larger than life. It kind of, it obviously has some vibes in addition to just what it is on the tin there. It does have some tonal vibes with like the Highlander TV series, among other things. But what you've got for each one, let's see if we can see. So the bottom bit of this character sheet here, that's what you've got for each of your characters. You kind of fill in what those statements are. Okay. And then you've got this little wheel of your relationship between them that runs from +5 to -5. On that wheel, there's like hot versus cold. So you can be sort of like, and in this case, it's like, oh, how do they define hot and cold? I was going to put some stickies in this. Quick flip to things. But the idea is like sort of a cold relationship is more sort of neutral, not cold like negative, because it could be cold negative or cold positive, but it's less volatile, I guess might be a good way of saying it. It is, let's see here.
I should say the circle that Nat showed us is a neat graphic. I like has a very arcane feel to it.
Yeah, there's that too. Yeah, here we go. Oh no, that's right. That's what it is. Sorry, I misremembered. It's really 2 tracks. You're tracking the hot or cold in the outer track and the value on the inner track. That's what's going on. That's what it is.
You could end up with like the same value, but swapping between hot and cold.
Right. Yes. You could end up with like a hot -3 or a cold -3 kind of thing. And they kind of talk about like, what does the relationship mean? And just a couple quick things like at a -1 to -2, you're kind of an associate. You're aware there exists. You're not exactly thrilled about it. For whatever reason, they move around in the outskirts of your social circle. If it's cold, it's no big deal. Like maybe you make fun of them on social media or something like that. If it's hot, maybe you'll skip a party if they're going. Like, you just don't want to deal with them. And it's a +1 or 2, that's an acquaintance. And then, you get like up to like a -5, that's an enemy. Hate is a strong word, but it's the right word. Or +5, cherished. She doesn't just complete you, she makes you better. He's the reason you keep fighting. You'll do anything to keep them safe. If it's cold, so long as you know where he or she is, you'll be okay. There's no reason to worry. You trust them, you trust the relationship. If it's hot, there's nothing you wouldn't do to keep them happy, and the grandest gesture isn't enough to express how you feel, kind of thing.
Are these things that shift from moment to moment, or are these like...
Yes, role to role, potentially.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I was kind of wondering how it fit with the earlier, like your reincarnate. Like, is this telling you how your relationship is each reincarnation, or if it's like the moment to moment change? Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, in fact, they've got a section right here that how the wheel changes whenever they move. Whenever a handful of things happen. Whenever you have a scene that influences your behavior, but nothing else forces change, if you play through a scene that changes the way you see a character, and other things don't, like the other mechanics don't manipulate it, just roll a die, move that many steps on the wheel. So if you go through a scene and like you have a big falling out with somebody, it's going to change it even if nothing else in the rules would make it change. They say, okay, well then do this. This game has maneuvers, I'm going to come to that will directly manipulate that. And the maneuvers can be things like, you shame a person and therefore kind of that kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
actions you can take and can do things, but they're sort of like, for lack of a better word, special powers in the sense of not just actually I'm trying to remember if everybody has all the maneuvers. Maybe the maneuvers everybody has. Yeah, I think everybody actually can access them in general. I mean,
well, they're kind of like the important things that people do to like influence each other.
well, like violent maneuvers like grapple and final gambit. But there's also I'm trying to remember where they are in here. But there's also ones that aren't. Yeah, seduction, persuasion, motivation, ingratiate. So yeah, they're how you do the things. There's some magic things that can affect it. Escalating a die roll. So not always, but a lot of the time, with the basic die mechanic, it depends on things like your stats and so on. But if you fail, you can choose to escalate, and that is basically a push your luck kind of. Anyway, anytime you do that, it's going to end, and the person you're interacting with, and this could be an opponent or an ally, like they could just be in the scene with you, or they could be the person you're clashing with for whatever reason. It's going to change that relationship wheel. And anytime you do roll a die that would involve moving on that wheel, you can also spend some of your sanguine humor to adjust that result. So yeah, so there's that kind of thing. So yeah, I guess it's not so much roll by roll, but like scene by scene. It won't change every scene, but it could change every scene, and you could conceivably change multiple wheels with multiple people in a single scene, depending on what's going on. Yeah, you could do enemies to lovers and lover to enemy in the same scene if you wanted to.
Is the idea that as a player, I would be kind of like trying to change my relationships with people and kind of aiming, like picking maneuvers that are more likely to make that happen?
I don't know if you're trying to change it, but you definitely. So conceptually, the game is definitely about these interrelationships between the characters. The sort of, for lack of a better term, the named characters, the ones you have these relationships with, which
the reincarnated ones
could also be some NPCs. In fact, should be some NPCs. There should be some purely, well, I won't say antagonistic because they could actually be allies or whatever. But the point is like somebody other than the other players. So that's conceptually, and then mechanically, as a practical matter, you can certainly choose your course of action. And some of the maneuvers like play into that so that like persuasion, you've got to have at least a +2 or better relationship with the person in order to do it. You can bully somebody that you're not, but you have a negative or a positive, but to persuade them, you have to have a positive or they won't listen to you.
So you're going to do things to try and get to that spot. Yeah.
Right. And so it'll have the twin effects of, well, maybe persuading them what you're doing, but also of, yeah, if accepted, not only do the relationships both see increase per your leverage, so what you use as the leverage for it will affect how much it changes and which direction, and then and the target gains a sanguine humor, and so it's very much, and in my opinion, it is the core of the game. The problem with this game is it's not the whole game. This game is so amazing. Like I could pull like 6 Arcane Gems out of this game. This game has at least 6 Arcane Gems and like 4 more systems. And the thing that's so cool about it is almost every one of them is, well, they're all at least good. And most of them are really cool. Like the way the humors work. And here's the thing. I could call, this game has, like, the humors are used in a way that I could call them core stats, or you could kind of call them, like, stress tracks or something like that, where you've got 4 pairs of humors, will versus anamnesis, forgetting for anybody that either doesn't know the word or I mispronounced it, tenacity versus dominion, intensity versus legacy, and void versus eclipse, which they mean something in the game, but they're little, whatever. And with each of those, they're in opposition, but not in a simple, like, they sum up always, but like they limit each other. So you can have some in each, but at some point one of them gets high enough that then the other one's going to have to go down, the oppositional one, and you use those for, you track them and you use them for rolls, and they're kind of like your stress tracks, instead of like wounds or stress or breakdown or something like that. Then there's a completely different set of your core traits: aggression, perseverance, and creativity. I love the fact that, again, those are kind of like, none of those is like strength or intelligence, you know?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
they're all about attitude and approach, you know? I want to be clear. I love this game, but it's a lot, you know?
Yeah.
You've got like your competencies, which are kind of more like skills, but also they're like free form. Like, this is the kind of game where you're like, you kind of come up with what they are. Like, there's their examples here.
This game is a good entry into my kind of kidding, but not really, belief that 90% of game design is just naming things well.
Yeah.
This game is clearly naming things well.
It mostly is, yeah. So like, yeah, okay, that's right. Competencies actually encompasses several things. And like, you got our aptitudes, our clusters of skills. So instead of, this is the kind of game where you're like, what are your aptitudes? Well, I'm a biologist and a con artist, as opposed to like a bunch of skills, and they kind of overlap, and can you make it fit and that kind of thing.
There's a category of games in which, like, if I want to play them, I will tell other players that, like, I need somewhere around half of you to be as invested in learning these rules as I am.
This is one of them.
There are games that I play that I love that, like, before I do that, like, I do sit down with my players and say, it doesn't have to be all of you, but I can't be the only person explaining the rules over and over again. Like, there are some games where that's perfectly fine, and that's like my own games when I run them. I'm happy to do it because that is my job. But like, yeah, there are plenty of games in my collection that I very much enjoy playing where I'm like, I really need at least like two of you to buy this book, read it cover to cover, and be excited about playing it and helping the other players make tactical choices, you know, not necessarily tacticals and battle choices, but like know that there is a maneuver that will move that needle to +2 so that you can in fact start trying to persuade them, right? Like,
right.
I can't always be the one being like, oh, well, if you want to do that, you should do this.
Right.
The maneuvers, they are really well designed to work in a system that doesn't have a set skill list. So you can't have maneuvers that are like, oh, you know, if your sword skill is this high, or even your fighting skill, you might literally have nobody who's got that. But does that mean nobody in here knows how to fight? I mean, it might. Depends on the characters, of course. It's not the kind of game where you just assume that they all have martial skill. But the point is, they're really well designed. The maneuvers, I really love those. And they're mostly pretty straightforward. Like, one of the problems I sometimes have with games that have something like this, I mean, this isn't that dissimilar from how Powered by the Apocalypse does things, where there's kind of this idea of like, what am I doing? Just narratively. Oh, I'm trying to persuade the guard to let me talk to my friend. I'm not even asking him to let him out. Just talk to him, you know, kind of thing. And, you know, in most Powered by the Apocalypse games, oh, yeah, that sounds like blah, blah, blah. You know, you've either verbatim hit it on the nose, you know, whenever a character says they are persuading, or you'll be like, oh, it basically fits this. Occasionally, and this can be where a Powered by the Apocalypse kind of falls down, you like go, I don't know, it's none of these, you know, kind of thing. And then it's like, well, does that mean we don't roll, or do we shoehorn one in? You know, I find the maneuvers in Amaranthine really well designed. I certainly didn't I did occasionally run into the problem of, there's a few too many, but not too many. You know, there's like a couple dozen, you know, like, what do we got? Like 3, 6, 9. Okay. Maybe there's several dozen, though technically they treat all the violent maneuvers as a permutation, i.e. an optional rule. Like, you don't even maybe need those. Maybe you just stick with, like, you know, rather than having like separate kick and trip and dramatic entrance is one of their violence maneuvers. So the kind of game it is, you know.
Yep,
but maybe you don't need that. Maybe it can all be about, the point is I'm trying to overcome them or persuade them. Right. Yeah, I'm trying to persuade them with a sword, but it's still persuasion, you know, kind of thing. But, you know, they fit pretty well in the sense, you know, like, I don't remember particularly running into the problem of like, oh, is this more about, this isn't really brainwashing or persuasion. What is it?
They're sufficiently different.
Yeah. They're both sufficiently different, and they seem to cover the bases.
And they cover most of what you're interested in doing in this game.
Yeah.
There is definitely a thing to like designing a game where the affordances that the game is giving you, whether it's through like moves or feats or however you call them, whatever those affordances are describing the playing field, like the things the way you're allowed to interact. Because there are like genres of fiction where like certain ways of doing things just don't come up because you suddenly change the genre, right? Like,
right, yeah.
You know, like you can easily take a romance and turn it into like a borderline horror thriller,
right? Yeah,
by changing how you resolve an argument.
mm-hmm.
So there's like that goes on with some games. The problem that I keep running into is like games that have like, here are the rules for deceiving someone, here are the rules for persuading someone, and then you're like, I'm really good at deceiving, but I haven't done anything for the persuading part. I have ulterior motives for why I want to persuade them, but I'm literally not lying to them.
Mm-hmm.
What am I doing here?
Yeah, which of these buckets is this supposed to fall in?
And like I said, in terms of like sort of an arcane gem, I think that Amaranthine, I mean, obviously it may not work for every single group because, you know, since you are doing this in natural language mostly, and I won't promise that it would always do it for everybody, but certainly that was our experience playing. Is like, yeah, no, this fits, and it felt relatively natural, you know. But I mean, like I said, I still think that relationship, the way they work, the fact that it ties into basically every scene, if not every role, but in a way that wasn't like, okay, and now we have to check the number on the dial, you know, kind of thing. Like it's just, yeah, there's the primary and secondary stats, plus like your combat stats are dynamically chosen. There's sorry, just looking at my notes here, like the combat mechanics actually are really interesting and well done, which for a game like this, they might not have been. They could have been very much like, roll your dice.
Or like, yeah, this game isn't about fighting, so we don't have combat mechanics, which like is a fine choice to make, but
but in this case, no, they're there and they're I think they're well done.
Thinking about way back when we first put Dread out, Dread, I've enjoyed over the years seeing what the zeitgeist is by how people ask questions about Dread. Like in the early days, the questions were like, well, how do I do combat? And we're like everything else, and they're like, no,
people will die. Like,
where's the combat section?
Yeah.
And then, like, I remember distinctly our friend Rob Bowl asking me, how do you know when the game ends? And like that blowing my mind, and suddenly that became like a thing that people were very excited about. And I'm not saying there's anything special about Dread. It's just the oldest game that I've had a part in making, right? Yeah. But it's just funny watching. It's fun watching like how the central, the assumptions,
kind of like the premises that people are coming.
Where they're coming from and applying them to.
Yeah, I think maybe we'll wrap up our homework here.
Yeah.
That sometimes when we're doing homework, we'll kind of be like, all right, so this whole game is kind of an arcane gem.
Right.
And like, try it, but like, here's the specific thing. And it sounds like you're kind of in that zone with like, this whole game is worth consideration, right?
Yeah.
It's a nice package.
But yeah, I definitely think the thing that is both the most coolest and is the thing you could just pull out and put in another game without having to pull the whole game. Those relationship circles and a few of the rules around those, I think those are just so cool. Wonderful. And I love those relationship statements. Those are really great for this game. I mean, for a less supernatural game, you might want different ones.
Yeah, and you can see where you'd use that technique for character generation or for like assigning names to those things as you play, because as you like discover those in play, there's a lot of different places in the play like cycle you could use that.
I pulled up the notes from our game here, and like one of them, I never allow you in the book collection alone.
That's good. I do love when a game creates artifacts like that like out of context, at least other role players are going to be like, oh, okay, there's a story there. Like, I don't know the exact story, but I know that there's a story there.
A thought I had that we did not discuss before we started recording was we should give a little shout out to, hey, Nat, what are you working on? What kind of stuff are you designing these days?
Yeah, what's you up to?
So, life, but on the role playing.
Yeah.
No, it's actually interesting. This was there's kind of two things that have been really on my mind in sort of the role playing stuff recently, and one of those is something that's been it's been something I've been wrestling with for years. I've been trying to do sort of a more low fantasy sword and sorcery kind of twist on Dread, like sort of doing this thing and kind of leaning into like, Conan and the giant snake sacrifice kind of scene as parts of the sword and sorcery, and a little more supernatural, but also a little more fantastical. Obviously you can do that kind of thing or anything you want that's got sort of that tension horror element with Dread. But, there's kind of two pieces of that. And it's actually kind of two things that kind of intersect there. And then one of them is Dread doesn't have a combat system. I don't think it needs one, not even for this kind of game. The other thing Dread doesn't have is like any kind of like, how do you handle magic that like the characters can access? Magic that's an external threat, that's easy. That's built right into the mechanic. Where's that sort of fine line? Like, and is it simply a matter of like sort of some advice and guidelines and like here's how you kind of set up the questionnaire, or does it actually kind of need to be a new game that maybe is building some new pieces? And I don't know. I've been wrestling with it, and like that's something that's been really interesting to me to play around with and kind of look into. Like the core of this in my mind is Dread really had two innovations, I think. Like, I mean, big, whatever, things that were, if not completely new, they were at least really new, whatever. Yeah. Obviously, one is using that Jenga instead of dice, the fact that meant every roll built on the last one or affected the future one, and, in a way, but not just like, you get a bonus to your roll or something like that. And the other, though, is the character questionnaires. And it's interesting to me, to your point, Epi, about like the zeitgeist and what people talk about. I've started hearing people noticing that a lot more in the last few years, saying like, hey, the Jenga's cool, but there's this other thing in here that also was new at the time and still isn't super common or anything, like it still gets you. I've seen other games come up with it. Some, I'm sure it was because of it. Some, I'm sure it was not. Most, I don't know. A lot of games out there, they just come up with it. But so like, I've been trying to play with that, and like I tend to maybe over mechanize things. I don't know, but like I've got this fun flow chart of like how to build character questionnaires for this, where it's like, in order to guarantee that like you've got at least one relationship question, but it's not always the same kind of relationship question, and it's not always going to be like the third one. Obviously, you can just shuffle the order. But still, that kind of thing. You do that. But the other piece I wanted to do that kind of dovetails into it is, again, when we wrote it, we were really worried about people not understanding that you can have a meaningful RPG experience in a single session. Keep in mind, this is 1999, 2000, right. When you think about the games that are out there then. So we ended up spending a lot of words talking about how to get through a good story in a single session.
We ended up spending a lot of words. Period. But no, I agree. Yeah.
That's a whole kind of paradigm that is just like, people will think about a game like, oh, is this a single session game or is it a multi-session game? Like you don't necessarily have to convince people that this exists, the single session game.
Now, yeah.
Right, exactly.
And so at the time, we spent very few words, but they're in there. I went back and looked after one conversation, like, I know we talked about it, but do we actually put it in the book, kind of thing. On how to do multi-session Dread, how to use it as a campaign game. Because at the time, I don't think it occurred to, I don't think it occurred to us. I certainly know it didn't really occur to me that would be a thing we had to tell people. Like, we just assumed people would, of course, try to run ongoing games with it. And we didn't really need to tell them anything, about that, or not much.
Between when we first conceived of the game and like had our first playtest, which kind of solidified like a large chunk of how the game worked, and when we published it, I did run a long-going zombie apocalypse game for a bunch of my friends back in Wisconsin, and to me, it just felt like, this is naturally how this worked. Now, I will say, and this is the thing to think about when doing campaign things, is that doing the campaign level one, when a character dies, there sometimes are bad feelings. Like when you're doing a one shot, you're like, oh, that's it, I'm out. Good. Okay. Like I had a good arc for this character. They deserve to die then, or whatever. Like sometimes you could die way too early, but there's ways to deal with that. But like in a campaign game, you're like, I had hopes and dreams. And I'm like, yeah, welcome to horror. And they're like, no, you don't understand. I had hopes and dreams. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. You did.
Yeah.
So that's a thing to keep in mind. But yeah.
And the thing I've been kind of noodling with on that is like, that's not a place where I think the issue is any actual change. I think that's just a thing that it's clear it needs to be kind of like explained better. And from conversations with people too, I realized I'm like, yeah, well, you do this and this and this. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, I can kind of see that. And again, that kind of comes back to the questionnaire. It's like something I was trying to build into this, am trying to build into like the sort of sword and sorcery setting for it. I don't even know if that's the right for this kind of game. That feels kind of weird, but one of your questions will always be about a closer, important relationship with not another PC, with somebody else. And that's how you can kind of set up like, right, here's my squire, i.e. my next character if this one dies.
Right, yes.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Here's my, or I have a very close sister who will probably come looking for me if I don't come home. I mean, that kind of thing. And that's how we can bring more characters in. Because, if you're going to do ongoing play with the kind of horror game that Dread is, you need to be able to bring in new characters for the players without turning into paranoia of like, he died, but here's Bob too, kind of thing. Like there has to be some stakes and consequences. You need to have those hopes and dreams dashed. I mean, or we've just changed genres, So
there's also a tradition. I wouldn't call it a trope so much, but like a little bit of a tradition in sword and sorcery, because a lot of the pulp era ones were just written and then published in a magazine that would eventually disintegrate, right? Nobody was thinking, these will be all collected. So there was like ones where like the main character dies, and then there's another short story about that main character in which they die. And
right.
Yeah, no way to put those in order. Yeah.
And nobody cares. It's just well, I shouldn't say nobody cares, but like it's a viable.
It's a way
option.
to deal with it.
Yeah. It's like, do you go more? This is more of an anthology, like the long-term play is like you're going through an anthology of these characters. So when one dies, is that then a marker to be like, all right, now we are starting the next story that could have taken place way before our last story. It's not necessarily has that time continuity. You can't continue the same characters. Kind of jump around a little bit with like, cause and effect.
Anyway, but so it's something that I sort of somewhat recently started revisiting. Like it's something I worked on years back, and it was one of those 80% done kind of things. I'm like going, and I don't know what the other 20% is, Another early design I had was Four Colors Al Fresco. So it's a superhero-y Renaissance, kind of more like at the pulp into superheroes kind of genre, kind of in there where they're, it's kind of where it's kind of aiming for more so than even like Silver Age and Golden Age and so on. And kind of it's an alt history or parallel world. I mean, I guess it's alt history the way Castle Falkenstein's alt history. It's not really our world, but it's also not. And that one is mechanically complete, and like everything's ironed out. It works great, and I'm real happy with it. And it's just a matter of it's not actually a fully written game yet. Like I can't just hand somebody a thing and here it goes. It's interesting. It talks about the intersection. My experience of it is it talks about the intersection of, game design as a like mathematical game approach, and game design, at least for our role-playing games, as a artistic cultural kind of thing, because the concept of the setting leans into the conceit, and I don't remember if this is exactly how, I think at some point I may have even written it this way, but I think of it in my mind as like, it's Italo-centric. Like it's set in like 1400 faux Renaissance Italy, or Renaissance faux Italy. I don't know where the faux goes in that. Anyway, in the same way, like if you think about like late pulps, like the sort of more super heroic ones, like, you know, a Doc Savage or the Spider, you know, where you start getting into powers and sort of like proto superheroes, or early Silver Age. And think about like the villains that come into that. I mean, this is like cultural nationalism run amok a little bit, you know, like there's, you know, think about the stereotypes of like the Soviet supervillain kind of thing. And why aren't there ever Soviet superheroes? You know, like, and so my initial conceit was kind of like, what if we kind of transplant that rah-rah America, but now it's rah-rah Italy, but it's 1400s Italy. We don't have to deal with, you know, Mussolini, you know, like you know, that kind of thing. Yeah. But at the same time, you know, it's intended to be played for satire, not played straight. This is Xena, the Xena look at like national identity and that kind of thing, you know. But man, that's a hard one to like, you know, as both I learn more things and become sort of more aware of the culture around me, and the culture around me changes. That's a little trickier to like, how do I do this and make it clear? And it can't completely strip it out, or it's like, well, then why is it even set in Renaissance Italy? Like, you need some element of the culture, or you don't have the culture. And so that's actually been the kind of thing I've been kind of wrestling with. And it's not even to the point yet of like, oh, I should be, you know, engaging some folks with different cultural backgrounds and get some sensitivity readers or something like that. There's not enough on paper yet to even do that. I mean,
it's more kind of like conceptually, like, how do I want people to engage with this through the game?
Yeah, exactly. Like,
you want to be clear in yourself about what you mean before like handing it off to someone else to get like critique or whatever.
Right. Well, and like, I want to be able to incorporate other cultures beyond that. And again, it's a very Xena history where like, we have both the Ataturk Empire and the Persian Empire, and they're over here, you know, kind of thing. That's like, how's that? Shh, they're there, okay, you know. But is there a way? And maybe, and that's the other thing, is maybe there isn't. But is there a way to use cultural caricature that's not? Where's the line between caricature and stereotype?
Right, yeah.
From an example of a thing that I am currently working on, which is my Robin Hood game, where like this is the lowest possible stakes of that. Sometime around, oh man, I'm not going to place the exact time, but like more recent than you expect. Ivanhoe. I'm going to say Ivanhoe did this, where he was like, oh, Robin Hood is a Saxon and he hates Normans. Right. And I'm like, I don't want that in my game.
Right, for that kind of game, right. Yeah.
There are a lot of ways to set up the conflict you want in the game between Robin Hood and the Merry Men and like the nobles or whoever.
Like the ruling class.
Without bringing Saxon Norman into it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like, I don't think anyone, I mean, like, I don't live in England. I know that there's still like...
there's probably somebody who's like, we're more English than you are because we're... Pick one of those two categories.
and of course, like, you know, like, that's the Saxon and the Normans, which are both invaders. Like, and of people who invaded the people before them. Like, it's an island that's been invaded many, many times, but like none of that is relevant to the story that I'm trying to tell. I'm also hedging in another way where I'm like, I'm definitely letting people know it's my Robin Hood game. I'm talking about it as a Robin Hood game. I'm not going to mention Robin Hood. Forest outlaws in the Greenwood and, you know, that kind of thing. Like a lot of winking there, but But like I said, that's the lowest stake version of it. And even at that point, I'm like, I don't need it.
Well, and that's the thing is like, I'm not trying to design a game whose point is meaningful cultural commentary or hey, let's learn what this looks like from the other point of view necessarily. Like, there's a little tiny undercurrent of, oh yeah, that is kind of how we do these, like by putting it in a slightly different culture. But I mean, you know, the amount of difference between Renaissance Italy and arguably a descendant culture of it, you know, our modern, you know, or like 1950s America or something like that is small compared to some cultural differences, but also it's still there.
I get to engage with this stuff kind of on easy mode because in my wrestling game, it's like, well, here's the deal with wrestling. The villains are bad people, so they can have bad opinions as long as everyone at the table is all aware, like you're all on the same page and like, oh yeah, they're the heel. So as long as everyone's engaging with them on that level, you can put bad words in their mouth. You can have them be sexist or racist or whatever, just like how real wrestling does. It gets more complicated with real wrestling because it matters, right? The slip between the characters' opinions and the promotion's political leanings matters in the real world in a way that when you're playing the game.
And in the real world, you don't always know how much is the wrestler and how much is the character.
That's the power and also the difficulty with dealing with engaging with wrestling.
Have you watched Low?
Okay.
I watched.
Yeah. Okay. That was they do that. They handle that so well with some of those characters and with some really serious cultural commentary.
Yeah.
I think about like the whole arc with Welfare Queen, and things like that.
Yeah. The platform that wrestling gives for for dealing with real world stuff is really powerful, which is great. But yeah, when writing the game and putting text in the game about this stuff, I had to be pretty pointed about like, as the designer of this game, as the person whose words you're reading right now, you're allowed to have bad people in your game. I give you that permission, right? Like they're villains, they're heels, it's fine. However, you need to know, and everyone at the table needs to know that they can at any time be like, hey, pump the brakes on that because I am not interested in getting way into this storyline with a sexist heel. Like, I just don't want to do that.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like I totally get it. Let's figure out some other way to have them be bad people.
Yeah, you can be a bad person without being racist. It's possible. I promise you.
I remember, it was after the 2008 crash, right? Like after the economic downturn. What do we call it? Recession?
The financial crisis and the Great Recession.
Yeah. When it was JB got out on the WWE, and he just like, I just want to thank you all for my new yacht, like for bailing out my yacht.
One of the heels, I assume.
Oh, it's JB, isn't it?
Well, JBL.
JBL, that's it. Yeah.
John Bradshaw Layfield. There we go. Took me a second.
It's just one of my favorite heel moments, and also probably I if I met that guy in real life, I probably
he's a bad
scumbag.
Yeah,
like an actual.
He's a documented has pretty bad opinions about things.
Yeah. But still, and that's the troubled relationship with it, because that moment was just like exquisite.
Right, it's the perfect moment for making a villain. Yeah. Well, speaking of perfect moments, I think we've definitely covered what we wanted to cover with our episode here. And we clearly could continue talking about game stuff forever, but we do have to call it at some point. So, Nat, thank you so much for joining us, taking the time and sharing your Arcane Gems, and also I really appreciate hearing a little more backstory about Dread, obviously, but also just hearing what you're working on and where your head's at is super interesting. So thank you for that.
The other place it's always at is the math part, the weird mechanics stuff.
Someone has to think about it. I'm not doing it, so I'm glad someone else is.
Well, except you do some interesting things with those for your games. But no, like the one that just popped in my head is I'm like going, at some point I pulled out we always call them the brick of dice, so like the D6s.
Epi is slowly moving in the fascinating world of graph theory to make sure that I know you're also doing math, Epi.
Yeah. I love it.
We used to always joke about like games like Hero System, where especially if you're doing a hero system where you're going to be throwing a fistful of dice or Shadowrun or something, and we're like, we're just going to have a brick of dice for this, like. And so what standard ones of D6s is what 2, 4, 12 dice, and like the little case or whatever. And I was like, and I don't know, just the other day it popped in my mind, like, what about a game where that actually is like a dice step game, but instead of like D6, D4, D8, it's like D6, D brick, D.
Oh right, yeah.
Mini brick. The mini dice is 36 dice in one of those.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, so anyway, I'm rolling 4D mini brick. I don't know.
It's the same weight in dice. It's just the size of them, not the number of sides, but the physical volume of them keeps shrinking as you.
Yeah, or something. I don't know. I haven't gotten any further than like, why would you do this? And is it actually any kind of win? And are you counting these? This would be a pain. I don't know.
You can roll 2 ounces of dice. You get to pick what goes in, as long as you're, not over that weight. Well, I get to roll 3 ounces.
My thought was the next step after D mini brick is D pound of dice.
Yeah.
You can buy a pound of dice. There you go.
You can buy a pound of dice.
Dice.
There's a vendor at Gen Con that I think did the mug of dice.
Yeah.
Where you took a stein and whatever you scooped up in it, was a flat rate. Yeah.
Anyway, it's just random math, but
we can always find new exciting ways to not use dice the way they were supposed to be used.
Yeah.
That's important. Nat, is there anywhere on the internet that if people are interested in more of your stuff, they should find you?
Honestly, the most likely you'll find something, and that likelihood is not as high as I'd like, but I've been trying to get back to it. So I've got a WordPress blog. It's just woodelf.wordpress.com. So real straightforward to remember in theory.
And we will put that, and also, of course, a link to The Impossible Dream. In our show notes for people to follow up on all of the curious things that you have had to share with us.
Mm-hmm.
We appreciate
and
it.
I definitely I've got a slight backlog. I've got a bunch of partial posts. I need to get more stuff, but honestly, I was just looking in the it has been
this is the human condition.
4 years since the most recent post there, so there's a good decent backlog there. It's not all role playing stuff, but that's mostly where I put the role playing stuff, since a lot of the other places that I used to go kind of have disappeared over the years. So,
Yeah.
R.I.P. G+, R.I.P. Twitter.
Twitter, I guess.
Yeah.
Story Games had some nice discussions too.
Pour one out for a real one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Been great to be here. So, appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. As always, you can find all of the Unwritten Earth stuff at unwrittenearth.com. That includes links to Epi's work and my work as individual designers, as well as all of our stuff under this umbrella. The podcast, the Patreon, the titles we're starting to bring in, such as my Sword and Sorcery tomb robbing adventure game, Masks of the Mummy Kings, and Epi's time-traveling temp worker adventure.
Time and Temp.
Yeah, save the world, but don't get appreciated for it. Time and Temp. And then also we are still working on our annual that is coming together. We have the map. The map looks great. If you're a backer, you can go check out the backer updates to see the preview of that. It's all coming together. Unwrittenearth.com. This podcast is by us. Go us. Our music is by Will Yobst. You can find Will at will.com, of course, as well as their games over at Good Luck. It's either goodluckpress.co or goodluck.co.
Good Luck Press, I think.
Thank you, Will. Here's the thing. We always end our episode with a question. Epi, have we designed a game yet?
No, not yet. Still working on it. We're 80% of the way there.
There we go.
First 80%.